Let's get started because we are starting-ish already. My name is Michael Goldberg. For those that are just joining, I'm our Executive Director of the Veal Institute for Entrepreneurship here at Case Western Reserve University. I'm also a professor at the Weatherhead School of Management. We're thrilled to have you here today for it's our first ever Sports Entrepreneurship Conference. I know people have been coming in and out. We've got a good crew of students and alums here with us at ThinkBox on campus. And some of you are on Zoom and some are on LinkedIn. And it's a pleasure to welcome my good friend Lisa Levine to join us today to talk about her business. She's been a great entrepreneur in the sports communication world for a long time, and is a good friend and has been a mentor to a lot of people who are interested in the sports world and communication, so we're thrilled to be in conversation with her. All of our past sessions today have been moderated by students, and we're thrilled that Annika Washburn, who's a computer science student and also a member of the women's soccer team. Lisa, we're 3 in a row women's soccer team student moderators, and they're doing really, really well this year, so come to their game. What time? Saturday night?
1:30.
Saturday afternoon, 1:30. Good seats available. Good seats are available. So let me turn it over to Annika, who's going to run the show. As usual, if you're on Zoom, just let us know in the chat or raise your hand if you have a question. If you're on LinkedIn, just put a question in the comment. And if you're here with us at ThinkBox, just wave at me and we'll make sure that we get to your question. So with that, over to you, Annika.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm here with Lisa Levine. She has held many different positions over her career. She was a reporter for the Cleveland Indians, the director of broadcasting for the Baltimore Ravens, and she currently runs her own business as a media coach for athletes. So she's a PR specialist in sports. Before I give any more spoilers, I just want to turn it over to Lisa and have her share more about her career journey and everything that she has experienced over her time since college. So yeah, Lisa, over to you.
Thanks so much, Annika. And is it Annika or Annika?
Annika.
Annika, okay, great. I'll make you a deal. If you come watch my daughter's soccer team and give them some tips, we'll come watch yours. It'll be great. So as Annika said, I grew up in Cleveland and went to Tufts University and actually was a political science major. I thought I wanted to get into nutrition, which is why I went to Tufts. They have a great school of nutrition. And then I started taking all these science-related classes and realized it was definitely not for me. And I really didn't know what path I wanted to take. So that's something good to keep in mind. Just because you go to a certain school doesn't mean you have to have the path designed directly ahead of you. But I interned for a couple TV stations in college in Boston, and then I went, instead of going abroad my junior year, I went and interned for a TV station in Washington, D.C. and took some foreign policy classes. And as I told Annika the other day, I think I sent out about 200 resumes and letters to TV stations around the country when I graduated, and I got 200 rejection letters back. And was then very lucky to come back to Cleveland and literally get a lucky break at a TV station here, Channel 5. Where Nev Chandler, who was the main sportscaster's producer, fell and broke his leg. So he was looking for kind of a gopher to go around and get interviews with different professional athletes from the Browns and the Indians and the Cavs. And I was very fortunate to work at Channel 5 and kind of worked my tail off, working about 70, 80 hours a week, maybe getting paid for 15 to 20 of those hours. But I did that for almost a year and then fell into a full-time job. And I did that for 7 years. And then I was ready for a new challenge and I had an opportunity to go work for CNN-SI, which was like a sports network that CNN was starting. And literally about a week before I was about to start, I went out to Baltimore to cover the Ravens' first game and saw the owner of the Ravens, former Browns. They had just moved there. And he asked what I was doing. I told him I was about to go take this job. He said, "You don't seem that excited. Would you want to come work for us?" And it sounded really intriguing, but I didn't want to just be a TV host. So they hired me as their director of broadcasting. And it was really instrumental to what I do now because I learned the other side, not being in the media, but working for a team and working how you control messages and control the environment, and worked for the Ravens for 4 years and then met my husband in Baltimore. And I also told Annika the other day, I cut out a really small article in USA Today before I left for Baltimore 4 years prior about a woman who was doing media training for athletes. I thought it was kind of interesting and just kept it in a folder. And when I decided to come back to Cleveland, I thought it might be an interesting business to try and start because we wanted to have a family. And I knew it'd be tough to work in television and tough to work for a team too with those hours. And so I started my business with the help of someone like Mark Shapiro, who I had known when I was a reporter, and started doing media training for athletes. It was kind of a new field, doing different presentations to pro sports teams. And then I got into the leagues, the NBA and the NFL, and Major League Baseball hired me to present to their rookies, and just tried to create the program and the process on the go. What would it look like? How would we engage these athletes? How would I keep their attention for 45 minutes? What were the key messages? And over the last 20 years, that's definitely evolved with the advent of social media. But about 7 or 8 years ago, so maybe 8 years into the business, I started doing more consulting for teams. They were asking my opinion on different PR issues. And so for the last, 12, 14 years, 90% of my business has been as a PR consultant to about 6 primary teams throughout pro sports. The Browns here in Cleveland, the Vikings in the NFL, and then the Oklahoma City Thunder. And I do some work as well for the Jazz. I've known Quinn Snyder for years, and the Red Sox. And I know you're going to have someone on from the Red Sox next, and have done work for the Blackhawks. So that's kind of where I am now. I still do the presentations, probably about a dozen during the year, but 80-90% of my work is as a consultant. I'm happy to share more with you as we go along.
Great, Lisa. Thank you so much for sharing. So you mentioned your media presentations changing over the years with social media and new technologies. Could you touch a little bit more about that and just kind of some examples of new things that you had to introduce as technology has changed?
Sure. So not just from a technology standpoint, but also just from an issues and political standpoint, and what people's expectations are of athletes and the different questions that the media ask them. But when I first started my business, I had no social media examples or involvement of, how athletes should post on Instagram or how they should use Twitter. And at that time, it was usually pretty positive examples. So if they were involved with the brand, how they might incorporate it, or in terms of their day-to-day existence, some things to include or not include. And we'd go through just different examples, and that's really evolved. Mookie Betts, a player that I worked with the Red Sox, who's now with the Dodgers, grown in popularity, and have done some work with Instagram, and they really pushed for Mookie to start using Reels. So before he was playing in one of the World Series games, we said, hey, we should start using Reels. He was very grateful for the help. It was not something he had thought about, and it brought in whole new viewership and followers for him. So there's so many different avenues, and guys use it and women use it in so many creative ways. But so it's not just the technology, but it's also the issues. And if we can, Annika, I'll take everyone through just a few minutes to show a few examples of what I do in a presentation, if that might be of interest. Let's see if from a technology standpoint we can get this to work. So I need to screen share. If you guys can enable it, let me know.
You should be able to share your screen.
Okay, great. So this is a little bit of an example of, first of all, when I start off a presentation, I'm always trying to get them to have some key takeaways. And these are my primary 4. It's all about controlling the interview. It's making sure that you're prepared. It's not just what you say, but how you say it. And then what are your walk-offs, meaning what do you want them to take away? So it's not just being reactive to the media. But the point I was trying to make is one of the presentations I recently did, this is what I showed them. These were a bunch of the different issues that they were going to face when they did media the next day. So they were going to get asked about the vaccine. Were they vaccinated or not vaccinated? What their opinions were on social justice issues. I work closely with the Vikings, so the George Floyd issue is very prevalent there. Political issues, certainly during elections, who they voted for and why. And then maybe they'll get asked about their team roles, and the X's and O's and expectations. But a lot of it has nothing to do with what's going on in the field. So an example I'd like to show them is, they really need to be prepared before they go and talk to the media and not take this approach. So take a listen.
Here it is. My philosophy is basically this, and this is something that I live by, and I always have, and I always will. Don't ever for any reason, do anything to anyone for any reason, ever, no matter what, no matter where or who you are with, or where you are going, or where you've been, ever, for any reason whatsoever. Sometimes I'll start a sentence and I don't even know where it's going. I just tell my find it along the way, like an improv conversation. Improvisation.
And what I say to them is they can't have any improvisations. They really need to know what it is they're going to say, because if they misspeak, it becomes a headline and that becomes associated with them. And the other quick example I'll show you is from it's a Key and Peele episode, and it just shows kind of the weight of their words and the importance of really thinking about what they're about to say. It's obviously an exaggeration, but it keeps the player's attention. Take a listen.
Fantastic. Charlie Sanders, fresh off of his victory, and just feel like he's ready to touch the moon. I can fly! Anybody can fly! If you believe in yourself, the way I believe in myself tonight, you will fly! What's next for Charlie Sanders and the kids? You can actually fly! No, not literally. Yes! Literally, kids, young kids. I want you to go up on the roof right now. What? Fly into the night sky. Okay. People will see you flying, and you can do anything. You can do anything. Well, we just want to remind the kids, of course, you cannot actually fly, kids. Oh, y'all screw that negativity, man.
So obviously an exaggeration, but it's trying to reiterate to the guys that you need to be prepared. You need to think about, what's your agenda going in. You need to anticipate what the questions are going to be, who your audience is, and never be afraid to ask really what it is that you are going to get asked, and do that through the PR departments that the teams have and through your own agents, but always make sure you're prepared, because you're asked so many questions that have nothing to do with the sport itself. So that's just a little snippet of some of the things that we talk about.
Great. Thank you so much, Lisa. To follow up on athletes being asked questions that don't have anything to do with their sport, what kind of advice do you give them when addressing these questions?
That's a great question, and it's changed over the years. I remember maybe 7 or 8 years ago, I was doing the NBA's rookie program, and I was asked the question. I think a player was asked the question. And basically, I said, you have every right just to say, I think it was about dogfighting. Dogfighting was big in sports. And he was asked, what are your thoughts about dogfighting? And he said, I firmly believe that people should be allowed to dogfight. But he said, I don't want people, to know that. So I said, okay, well, you have every right to say, well, that's, my personal opinion, and that's not something I'm going to get into. But on bigger issues like politics or social justice, what do you want to say? And he said, well, I really don't want to talk about it. I said, well, you have that right as well not to talk about it. But nowadays, more and more athletes do want to talk about those issues. And what I say to them is this: just make sure you're really thinking through 360 degrees what you're saying and how it impacts your community, how it impacts your own reputation, how it impacts your ownership group of the team, how it impacts your teammates and your coaches, because they're going to get asked the follow-up question based on what you say. But you have every right to share your views and to share your thoughts. And more athletes want to share their thoughts on social justice or political issues. The only thing that I say to them is just, you really need to think through the different iterations and ramifications before you go out there. And an example that I'll give you is Eric Kendricks, who's an all-pro player for the Minnesota Vikings, very involved in their social justice issues, and a veteran, really bright guy. And he did a lot for the team's social justice committee and knew he was going to get asked questions about it, but reached out to the PR department for the Vikings and myself and said, hey, can we set up time to talk through this? Because I want to hear your thoughts and feedback, and I want to go through it instead of just winging it the next day when the media asks me, even though I feel like I know what I want to say. And he just was so appreciative of the preparation and so appreciative of being able to take the time to walk through it. So it's really just thinking through how it impacts people and feeling comfortable, sharing your views. But if you're not comfortable projecting to the media, I understand you have a right to ask, because you always want that good rapport with the public and with the media. But at the same time, my biggest thing is that you control your message and you control whether or not you want to put your opinion out there. So if you don't convey to the media, I understand that you have that question. I understand why you ask. And then, but is it a pivot? But that's just not something I'm comfortable sharing. That's just not something that I'm comfortable talking about publicly. Or that's something I just don't know enough about yet to really share my views publicly. So making sure that they feel like they control the information at the end of the day.
Another hot topic in today's age is mental health and athletes prioritizing mental health, like Naomi Osaka. What kind of advice do you give athletes on this topic?
That's another great question. So I used that example this summer when that came up and talked about it with a few of the NFL teams and NFL players that I've met with. And I basically said a couple things. One, at the end of the day, you have the right not to do an interview if you were not comfortable, if you feel too much anxiety. But what I would strongly suggest to you, and most of the teams I work with have fantastic PR departments. Every team has a PR department on the ground, and they do a great job of meeting with the athletes individually, as well as with myself, to get them more comfortable and to take them through why they are uncomfortable talking. Or is it the line of questioning? Is it they don't like the way they sound? Is it because they're nervous speaking in public? Whatever it is, I say to them, let's walk through that first and make sure that it's not just an issue of you not feeling comfortable dealing with the media, you not feeling like you're prepared, you not feeling like you control the situation, and maybe get you to a level that you're comfortable. But if at the end of the day, you just, it makes you too jittery, it makes you too anxious, then you have the right to pass, except for in the leagues, it is a requirement that they meet with the media. And so different in tennis, she was fined, I think, eventually, but in the leagues, in the NBA and NFL and baseball, a player eventually get fined if he doesn't meet with the media. So what my focus is on, use your resources to try and get you more comfortable so that you're in a state of mind and you have a methodology to make you feel more comfortable.
Taking a step back from the actual specifics of your job and how you got into this isn't a field that I had really heard about before. And you mentioned that you'd kept an article in your wallet for a while. What made you actually kind of act on this desire to become a media coach, a media trainer?
So it really hits on the approach of, I had been working for 11 years in two, not traditional businesses as far as television and working for a pro sports team, but corporations basically, and got a really strong foundation to then be able to try and start my own business. Because it's all about two things: having experience, and also through those 11 years, the relationships I formed with people were what allowed me to go out and start my business. So Mark Shapiro, who I referred to before, without Mark giving me the opportunity to try this media coaching business with the Indians, I never would have been able to do it. A gentleman by the name of Wayne Embry, who is the general manager of the Cavs, who was a good friend, made some introductions for me. Ozzie Newsome, who was the GM of the Ravens, formerly with the Browns, also allowed me to start working with the Ravens to also test out the system. I mean, when you're starting a business, you don't know if your presentation is going to work, if the guys are going to be falling asleep in their chairs, if it has to be tailored for men and women differently, what to include in those presentations. But I also knew that television and pro sports are really difficult fields to get into. And you work a tremendous amount of hours, and you do it because you love it. You're definitely not compensated accordingly, and you don't have a lot of flexibility. And I knew in wanting to have a family that I wanted that flexibility, and I think I just had the curiosity and the drive to try and do something on my own instead of working for someone. But it was the experience of working for 11 years that allowed me to then go try it on my own. But I also think that I mentioned to you, when you start your own business, a couple of things happen. We moved back to Cleveland. My husband was starting a job, and he was busy, 40 plus hours a week. And I was used to working 70 hours a week and going. And I remember sitting in our house in January with the snow falling, and I couldn't stay, you can only stay so busy doing so much starting a business. You can only make so many calls, create so much stationery and marketing brochures. So it was really hard. So one piece of advice I would have is if you do want to start your own thing, try for 4, 6 months, a year to work through some of the ideas and the thoughts and the strategy of how you're going to go about it in your free time when you're presently employed. I think monetarily that helps too, because you've got a foundation, you're being paid day to day instead of just jumping ship and starting a business on your own. And then 2, you're going to try a lot of things that you look back on and you kind of laugh. And I also think I mentioned to you that I created a brochure to send out to these teams to do the media coaching. And I got a quote from an NFL player by the name of Robert Smith at the time. And I got a quote from Steve Kerr, and had spent the money on these beautiful, like 500 brochures. And I think maybe 490 of them are in my basement, because I quickly realized that no one in the sports field was really going to hire me based on my brochure, that it was all through relationships and word of mouth. So you try so many different things to that you look back on that worked, didn't work, and that's part of the fun, of creating a business. But doing it and thinking through a lot of those different ideas and strategies while you're currently employed can sometimes be easier before you make that big step.
It sounds like you had a really great support system going into building your business. What actions did you take to kind of create this network throughout your career?
So that's an interesting question, and I think a couple thoughts. I didn't do it intentionally. I really never envisioned going into media coaching or creating a business as a PR consultant, that it would then go from media coaching and morph into PR consulting. So I wasn't intentional as far as how these relationships were going to help me. But I would say to anyone listening, absolutely be intentional if you're thinking about being an entrepreneur and you're thinking about going into your business, or even if you are going to get a job with a team or a corporation or a television station or any field, because it's going to help you. But 2, I just love people and I love relationships. And when you develop good relationships with people and people trust you, and you have a connection, they're certainly willing to help you out when you're trying something like this. So Mark was really critical. And then the dominoes in the sports world, just to illustrate it, he was really good friends with a fellow by the name of Danny Ferry, who played for the Cavs and had played at Duke. And I knew Danny from when I was a reporter. Danny soon became the general manager of the Cavs. And so that's when I started working with the Cavs in those first couple of years. And then Danny was friends with a fellow by the name of Sam Presti, and he gave Sam my name and number because Sam had wanted to become a general manager. He's now the general manager for the Thunder. So I've worked with Sam for about 15 years. And Danny was also friends with a fellow by the name of Quinn Snyder, who played at Duke with him and went on to become a college coach and is now a coach of the Jazz. I've worked with Quinn for about 18 years. So it's all about relationships, and you just don't know how things are going to evolve, but that it is really critical in this industry to develop those different relationships so people can help you out. And don't be shy to knock on the door, to make a phone call, to send an email, shoot a text. People like helping other people usually.
That's some great advice. It looks like we have a question from the audience here. Jenna, go ahead.
Hi, Lisa. My name is Jenna Ruclo. I'm a current student at Case Western and also a member of the women's soccer team. I know you kind of touched on this earlier, but I'm just wondering how the role of your company has changed over time as athletes are almost expected to speak up about social issues, and the fact that they can no longer kind of like shut up and dribble, and kind of what your role is in that, and kind of making their platform one that's highly regarded.
It's a great question. So it definitely has changed over the years. I was really fortunate that when I started my business 20 years ago, it just was a field that it hadn't even started really, but I think teams were putting more and more value on having somebody come in and talk to their players about media. And then within the first 3 to 5 years of my business, the NBA mandated it. So every team had to have somebody come in and do media training with them. So that was obviously great for my work. But as far as these social issues and political issues, that's exactly what I referred to before is people want to talk about those platforms. They want to talk about their opinions. They want to get the word out if they feel like there's been an injustice or there's an issue that they feel attention needs to be brought to. So I really work with them on a couple of things. It's one, getting comfortable so when they do media interviews, being able to talk about that. Two, the PR departments within the clubs that I work with are very cognizant now of trying to help their own athletes have a platform, whether it's their own television shows, whether it's the team's Instagram, the players obviously using their own Instagram and Twitter and Facebook to bring exposure to issues that are important to them. So I really work with them on how they can also creatively use their own social media platforms to do that, but also how the team can help them bring some exposure to different issues that are important to them. But the most important thing is making sure that when they speak about it, number one, they're educated and they know the issues. And if they're willing to talk about something, they also have to know a couple things. I'll give you two examples. One, that they might get asked about it down the road. So one video clip that I show is when Tom Brady played for the Patriots. He had a Trump hat in his locker. And so people knew that he was a Trump supporter. And so when Trump made certain comments, I think he made those comments about locker room talk, Tom was asked about it. Tom Brady can just say, I'm not talking about that and walk away. Most athletes can't take that approach. But my point is, an athlete also has to realize that once they put their name on an issue or with a candidate, that they're going to get asked about it. Or if I had a coach give money, $500, not a lot of money to a coach, to a political candidate, and something happened with the political candidate and someone from the newspaper asked him about why he supported that candidate. So there are consequences, and just really trying to help them think through what those consequences are and making sure they're well informed before they speak publicly.
Thank you, Lisa. Mr. Goldberg has a question.
Hey, Lisa. I want to talk about you as an entrepreneur and building your business. I mean, you saw this opportunity in the market. You've built a really robust and nice business. And as I understand it, with the exception of maybe taking some partners along the way, it's still a business of one. I'm sort of curious. I mean, a lot of what we talk about at places like Case Western Reserve is sort of the entrepreneur that sort of sees a market opportunity, goes after it, raises money, builds a team, sells their business and exits. And those are sort of the famous entrepreneurial stories. But many entrepreneurial journeys look more like yours, a small business owner seeing an opportunity and consciously not growing your business, your team. Can you talk to us about that decision making, about sort of sizing the business to meet your needs and not expanding it?
That's a great question. Leave it to the professor to ask such a great question. So I think what's difficult, it's wonderful in a lot of ways because it's my own business and it gives me the flexibility that if I want to go to my daughter's soccer game or my son's tennis match or have a priority, especially now because I've had my clients for so many years, there's a trust that I'm going to get something done or be there for calls. The negative, just so we all are on the same page, there are a lot of negatives. It's a 24/7 business. So, I have calls tonight at 5 and again at 7, and then I'm on a lot of different calls at all hours of the night. But I took on a lot of business early on when the kids were younger, and it was great, but it was really hectic. And that's part of why, one, I morphed from doing all these media presentations to doing the consulting with 5 or 6 teams. But then the problem is you have these relationships and they want to talk to me. I'm not saying that in a braggadocio way, but the relationship is with me. I've been able to do what I do because of the experience, right? I learned having gone through a crisis with one team or seeing something in sports or in business from a positive or crisis perspective. That's helped me with another client, and they don't want to work with someone else, number one. Number two, because it's my own business, it's very, very difficult. And I've had this quandary literally for the last 10 years. In fact, the small world of it is Mark Shapiro's father is an incredibly well-respected individual in life. He's just an amazing man, but also in business. And I've talked to him at different points in times about how to expand. And he would say, you don't need to find you. You just need to find somebody that you're satisfied with that will ideally be maybe a step below you, but somebody that you pride in working with. And it's been very hard for me to find someone to give any of my business to. And it would have been a great model, especially for my media presentations, to find someone to bring in and let them go to. I mean, there's such a huge market. I never worry about competition because, I mean, you have an incredible market of Division I college sports teams that I did when I first started. And I would go in and talk to the football team, and they'd say, "Oh, while you're here, can you talk to basketball? Can you talk to, track and field?" I mean, there's thousands or hundreds, I should say, of opportunities. So I didn't do a very good job of finding the right person to go do that and monetizing it. The second thing that I haven't done a good job of is bringing somebody in on the consulting side and getting my clients comfortable with also relying on somebody else, so that either one, I had more free time, or two, if I wanted to sell my business, that I had somebody that could take the reins. So it's a tough situation to be in when you have your own business of where does it go when you don't want to be involved or work as hard. And I've been able to scale back to where I want to. But, in 5 years or so, when I want to get off completely, I don't have someone to carry the torch. So I think Ryan or Kira might jump in, and they listen to every conversation I have in the car and are incredibly trustworthy because they never repeat any of it, no matter how interesting or sexy the phone call is. So I don't know, who knows, maybe my kids will take over, but when it's a business of one, it can be difficult because it's like, intellectual property, but it's your own personality, style, experience. And it's hard to teach somebody because, especially in PR, a lot of it is instinct and gut based on previous experience, if that makes sense.
Yes, thank you so much, Lisa. That was very helpful. We have another question from the audience here.
Hi, Lisa. My name is Julia. I'm actually a member of the Veal Institute team as well.
Great.
Having been on both sides of the aisle, kind of in the media as well as on this back end working with teams and athletes, how do you reconcile the kind of potential conflict of interest in the media wanting to get information from athletes, sometimes athletes not feeling comfortable with that information or apprehensive of giving it away? And kind of do you have any thoughts on how that relationship could be made a little bit more mutually beneficial?
It's another great question, Julia. That's one thing that I really push and I have a bias for because I was in the media and I respect the job that the media has. But I also respect the fact that athletes are asked a lot of questions that, one, they may not be educated about, two, they may not feel comfortable talking about. And just because they're asked doesn't mean they should have to answer those questions. What I try to push is a lot of the humanistic side of it, right? So the media is always looking for content, and particularly in this day and age, that's how the industry has changed. I mean, everyone's looking for content, right? And there's bloggers of the gazoo, right? And everyone's covering sports teams, not just traditional media. Anyone can create a blog. So how do we try to satisfy that appetite for content, but also help the athlete that might not want to spend an extra 30 minutes a day doing media? And so what I really focus on is how do we reveal more of who you are as a person? How do we take advantage of the opportunity to talk about a business that you might have or a foundation that you might have, and also appease the media because it's great content for them. I'm also a big fan of, I feel like if the fan base in the community likes their athletes and they feel good about them, and they like who they are as people, they love what they're doing off the field, they're also going to root for them a little harder when they play or give them a little bit more slack. So I think that's a win-win. But it's always a little bit of a tug of war, because the other thing that happens, Julia, is oftentimes a reporter will come to cover a team and they'll ask a non-sports-related question because their editor sent them and said, hey, here's the story we're doing. You need to ask this player. You need to get the perspective of an Indians player or a Browns player on this citywide issue. And so they might get asked things at the behest of the news department or the news editor, not necessarily even sports. And that's where I say to the athletes, as long as you treat the media with respect and convey to them you appreciate the job they have to do, but you're just not comfortable and not get yourself in a situation. That's key. I give them 3 bridges to try and help create a little bit more of a respectful rapport. And that is, Annika, I appreciate you have the question for me. Annika, I understand why you're asking me the question. Annika, I respect you have to ask me the question, but, and then it's pivoting, I'm just not comfortable answering those questions, and often even saying it with a smile on their face, that they get it, but they're just not going there, versus no comment, which can come across a little harsher.
Do you do a lot of like practice interviews and reviewing of past interviews with the athletes themselves?
That's a great way for people to learn. And there are CEOs that I worked with of really established corporations, as well as general managers, presidents, and owners that are out in public all the time, and they hate watching themselves on video, but it's the best way to learn and to see certain nuances. So I do that all the time. I look at a coach that I work with one of my teams. I would look through 14 of his press conferences from last year, and we went through 4 of them. And he was like, "Oh God, this is awful. Oh my God, this is a really respected individual who should be really confident in what he does," and hated watching the press conference. But he remarked just how helpful it was and beneficial, because when you're in the moment, you're just not even aware of certain nuances you have and how you may react, or what I call fillers. And a lot of this isn't just for media, but it's even in everyday life. When you go for a job interview or you do a public presentation and you're constantly saying, I mean, or and you just don't come across as educated. So we also work on trying to reduce their fillers. And again, oftentimes they're not even aware of it until they see it on video. And number 2, when you're working with athletes in particular, they're very visual in their learning. So to be able to show them these clips that I must have 10 or 12 throughout a presentation. They're seeing an example of positive and negative and funny, so it comes to life. 2, it engages them, because if it was just me up there speaking for 45 minutes, they would all be snoring. So it has that effect too. So watching it, when I do men's tennis, I work with the men's tour, and they have a university for their players. By the time they reach a certain ranking, they all have to go through their university. So we do 15-minute mock interviews with every player on top of doing the 45-minute presentation. And all these guys now, a lot of them are top 25 in the world, but we all did the one-on-one training. They got me with John Isner, and so many of them have gone through it, and they love it. They appreciate it.
How much time do you spend with like a given professional athlete or team, like weekly, monthly, yearly?
So really, my core clients, which are about 6 or 7 teams, there's some stretches where I'm on the phone with them 15 hours a week if it's a crisis situation, a big trade or something happens. With the athletes themselves, probably only an hour and a half or 2, but most of the teams I work with, fortunately, I'm around them at different points in time. So this is a really big weekend, because Monday is the opening day for NBA camp. So normally I would go to Oklahoma City, or I would go to one of the teams that I work with to try and do a media presentation, and I get to know the guys. So I'm with them maybe an hour, and then I'll meet them on the road someplace, or when they come into Cleveland to play the Cavs, and I'm with them maybe a half hour. In fact, a funny story was back a year and a half ago, March, the Jazz were in Cleveland, and I met them at the Ritz, because that's where they stay. That's not a trade secret. It's pretty much the only hotel where any NBA team can play downtown. And I sat down to have breakfast with 2 of their players, Rudy Gobert and Donovan Mitchell, and chatted with them for 20 minutes. That was just, there's no issues to really talk about. It was just a good touch base. And 7 days later, they both tested positive for COVID. And they were the first professional athletes to test positive for COVID. And so it freaked me out a little bit. And I got a COVID test, which was really like the first time you could actually even get a COVID test. And the person from the local hospital came to our house with like a hazmat suit on and gave my husband and I COVID tests. But it was one of the first instances where you were directly exposed as somebody who is COVID positive. So what I do during the year is try and touch base with the different players, so that you have the equity when there is an issue that you want to text them or call them on the phone with. you have a relationship and they trust you and they appreciate your feedback. So it's a good relationship.
Yeah, that's great. Have you used your political science major at all throughout your career?
Only when dealing with international athletes like a Rudy Gobert from France or, no, I really haven't. I'd say maybe from a negotiation standpoint, when I was finally able to negotiate contracts. When you first get going, you're not negotiating at all. You just take whatever anyone offers you, and that's how you start your business, and your fees are really, really low. But not really, but I did enjoy it. Michael can attest, it's an interesting dilemma when you go to college. Do you just focus on your major, or do you get a liberal arts education and then try and do internships and other things in your areas of interest? So it was a great balance. The internships are key, whether you're in graduate school or undergrad, or and you can get that real life experience. It's highly, highly recommend it.
I think we have time for one more question. So a lot of us are college students and are graduating soon and looking to start our career. What advice do you have for all of us?
Well, I wouldn't worry. I know all of you are very interested in entrepreneurship. So what I would focus on is two things. One, going out into the world and doing something that you're really passionate about. So if you put in those 70 hours a week, you love what you do, and it's not about just the paycheck, but you get really good experience. And you put in those 50, 60, 70 hours a week, and you just build that skill set so that if you then 5 years later, 10 years later want to start your own business, you've got that core skill set to build upon. And two, that you just go about life and you go about your work having some bit of awareness about who you meet and how that person might be able to not just help you, but improve your thought process or your skill set, or make you think about things differently, and not be shy to circle back with them 6 months later or a year later and ask them questions. Be inquisitive, be curious, and certainly be proactive as far as staying in touch with different people to help you along the way.
Thank you so much, Lisa. I think that's all we have time for. I'll turn it over to Mr. Goldberg.
Great, Annika, awesome job. I don't know if your mom is on. I just was texting her. What a great job you did moderating. Well done. Lisa, thank you for joining. We know each other well. We've had many conversations over the years, but this was probably the longest. Actually, I was joking with the students, because of your background as a reporter, I often feel like when I'm with you as a friend, you're asking me all these questions, and then I come away and I'm like, I don't even know what's going on with Lisa, because she just interviewed me. So it was nice to have you on the other side of this so I could learn more about the work that you're doing. And thank you for spending the time and sharing, and we really appreciate it. So let's give a round of applause for Lisa.
If anybody in the class that you have my contact info, Michael, anyone reach out, let me know any follow-up questions, happy to.
Okay, very good.